Under this video, many of you asked for exactly this. The countries where the state doesn't just take your money, it burns it. We've excluded the poorest nations to focus on the worst deal in Europe. Countries that should function, but where the social contract is breaking down. We'll answer the questions that matter. Where does the money go? Why do some states ask for so much and give so little? And what makes a government inefficient, even when it looks wealthy on paper? You'll see citizens paying heavily only to get lost in medieval bureaucracy and failing services. Stay with me, because you won't believe which wealthy nations made it into the top 3. These are the 10 European countries where the state takes the most and gives the least. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 10, Portugal. Or, as we should call it, the tax haven entirely paid for by the working middle class. Recently, the European Commission issued a stern warning to Lisbon. The government's public expenditure risks significantly exceeding recommended limits. This leads to a brutal question. If public spending is increasing so much, and the state collects sky-high taxes, why are regular Portuguese citizens facing such a devastating financial blow today? The answer lies in a broken social contract. In Portugal, the top income tax rate reaches an asphyxiating 48%. The state takes nearly half your earnings to fund its bloated machine, while still honoring the golden tax breaks previously granted to wealthy expats and digital nomads. You pay the bill, but in 2026, you get rewarded with relentless hikes on property taxes and market rents that surged by over 5%. The ultimate insult happens when you actually need help. Bureaucracy is a nightmare, leaving only 43% of citizens satisfied with public administration. But the National Health Service is the most tragic symbol of this legalized waste. Despite burning through a public health budget of over 17 billion euros a year, the system is structurally collapsing. The ongoing national scandal of the maternity roulette perfectly exposes this mismanagement. Because hospitals fail to pay or retain staff, public maternity wards are systematically shut down on weekends. Pregnant women in labor are frequently forced to travel dozens of miles across the country, desperately hoping to find an open emergency room. When a state takes half your income but cannot guarantee a safe, local place to give birth, it is no longer taxation. It is extortion. Number 9. The United Kingdom. Over a third of England's councils are on the edge of bankruptcy. The UK's social contract isn't strained. It's dead. Taxpayers hand over more than £1 trillion a year and watch essential services collapse in return. Every constituent nation has its own version of the same story. In England, major councils like Birmingham have literally declared bankruptcy. The response? Streetlights switched off, council tax hiked by double digits. In Scotland, workers pay the highest income tax in the UK, peaking at 48%. Yet hundreds of millions were burned on the Ferguson marine scandal, where the state threw hundreds of millions at building 2 public ferries that are years late and still cannot sail. In Wales, the government spent over £30 million imposing an unpopular 20 miles per hour speed limit on nearly every residential road, triggering traffic chaos while the country posts the worst NHS waiting lists in Britain. In Northern Ireland, years of political paralysis, a parliament that simply refused to function, starved sewage infrastructure of basic funding. The result? Raw waste poisoning their largest freshwater lake. At the national level, the numbers are obscene. The scaled-back HS2 railway has ballooned to £102.7 billion. First trains delayed to 2036, possibly 2039. And the NHS, once Britain's proudest institution, is flatling. England's elective waiting list sits at 7.1 million people. A record 1.92 million patients are queuing just for basic diagnostic tests. 1 in 5 waiting over 6 weeks for a critical scan. There would be many more things to say, but watch this video if you want to understand how we got to this point. This is what £1 trillion buys you in modern Britain. Darkness at the street lights, ferries that don't sail, patients waiting in line for a scan. Number 8. Spain. Forget the holiday brochures. For the millions of middle-class Spaniards living and working there, Spain is a perfect example of what happens when a state taxes its people to fund 17 different governments, while asking the working class to pay for its past mistakes. Spain's biggest curse is its extreme administrative fragmentation. The country is divided into 17 autonomous communities, which means 17 different health systems, 17 different bureaucracies, and a massive duplication of political costs. But the real betrayal lies in how they fund it. Have you heard of the MEI? It's the intergenerational equity mechanism. Under this noble name lies a new rising tax slapped directly onto workers' paychecks. Instead of cutting political waste to balance the budget, the government decided to simply squeeze the current working generation to pay for the incoming wave of baby boomer pensions. So, you are paying a new solidarity tax to the state, but what solidarity do you get back? Just look at the news. Recently, hundreds of thousands of citizens took to the streets across Madrid and other cities, protesting the collapse of the public healthcare system. Today, over 850,000 Spaniards are stuck on surgical waiting lists. Families wait an average of 4 months for routine surgeries, which stretches to nearly 6 months in regions like Andalusia, and tens of thousands of children are left without an assigned pediatrician. While public services break down, the cost of living crushes the working class. Renting an average apartment in Madrid or Barcelona easily swallows 1,700 to 1,800 euros. In Spain, you are heavily taxed by a fragmented bureaucracy, squeezed by the housing market, and forced to pay for the country's past, only to be told there are no doctors left for your future. Number 7. Germany. For decades, Germany has been the unquestioned engine of Europe, the promised land of high salaries and perfect efficiency. But today, that engine is rusting from the inside out, and the working class is paying the ultimate price to keep the illusion alive. If you are a young or middle-aged worker in Germany, you face one of the highest tax and social security burdens in the world. But where does all that money go? It doesn't go to modernizing the famous autobahns or fixing the severely delayed national train network. It goes into a black hole, the pension system. The German population is aging so fast that the contributions of today's workers are no longer enough. To prevent a total collapse, the government is forced to divert nearly 128 billion euros of general tax revenue every single year, just to plug the pension deficit. That is a quarter of the entire federal budget being used simply to pay the baby boomers. While you are forced to fund this massive demographic crisis, the cost of living is eating whatever is left of your paycheck. The average rent for a simple one-bedroom apartment in Munich can easily swallow 1,400 to 1,600 euros a month. And what do you get from the state in return? A surprisingly outdated bureaucracy. Germany remains the analog giant of Europe, where citizens waste weeks waiting for basic paperwork in government offices that still heavily rely on physical mail and paper forms. In Germany, you are taxed like a billionaire to support the past, while trying to survive in a system that refuses to step into the future. Number 6. France. If you want to witness what happens when the state tries to do absolutely everything and ends up suffocating itself, look at France. For decades, the French have paid among the highest taxes in the world, believing they were buying an untouchable world-class welfare system. Today, that expensive illusion is completely shattering. France's public spending consumes nearly 57% of its entire economy. Yet in May 2026, the French Court of Auditors issued a terrifying warning. The social security deficit has exploded to a staggering, record-breaking 21.6 billion euros, pushing the legendary welfare system toward a literal liquidity crisis. So what does a bloated government do when it runs out of money? It squeezes the citizens even harder. To patch this deficit, the 2026 budget implemented massive cuts, slashing medical reimbursements, reducing sick pay benefits, and heavily penalizing family aid. This spark ignited nationwide fury. In January 2026, a major national strike by independent doctors and private clinics paralyzed the country, with 85% of practitioners protesting these draconian funding cuts. Imagine being a French taxpayer. You are taxed at Swedish levels to fund the French social security, only to discover that your local medical surgeries are closed, medications are no longer covered, and you simply cannot see a doctor. Meanwhile, the massive political bureaucracy remains completely untouched. The French state obstinately runs an army of redundant administrative layers that cost tens of billions of euros just to exist. In France, ordinary citizens are being pushed to the financial limit to fund a colossal, highly aristocratic state machine that is now actively cutting the very services it solemnly promised to protect. Number 5. Croatia. Forget the beautiful beaches and cheap holidays. If you actually live and work in Croatia, you are trapped in a system that drains your salary to fund administrative madness, while happily rolling out the red carpet for wealthy foreigners. If you are a middle-class worker, the state hits you hard. Between social security rates at 36.5% and income taxes reaching up to 33%, your paycheck is heavily squeezed. But where exactly do your hard-earned taxes go? First, to fund an administrative nightmare. Despite having under 4 million people, Croatia is heavily fragmented into over 550 local towns and municipalities. Most of these micro-governments are financially unviable, depending on state subsidies, while spending up to 80% of their entire budgets simply on the salaries of local mayors and bureaucrats. It is a gigantic machine of political patronage that leaves almost zero resources for real public services. The second black hole is the pension system. In 2026, pension spending is reaching a record €10.2 billion. 40% of this collapsing system must be directly subsidized by the central government. In late May 2026, the state officially announced it will abolish all taxes on pensions, starting in 2027. But with average pensions stuck at a miserable €689, this tax break only helps the wealthiest, leaving half of all local retirees stranded in poverty. Yet while citizens pay for this crumbling state, the government generously offers zero-tax visas to foreign digital nomads. You are squeezed dry to fund a broken pension model and a bloated political patronage machine, while Croatia is turned into a tax-free playground for wealthy foreigners. Number 4. Hungary. Forget the holiday brochures. For the millions of middle-class families living there, Hungary is a perfect study in fiscal deception. The government loudly boasts a flat income tax of just 15%. But this is a calculated trap. What the state doesn't take from your paycheck, it violently extracts whenever you open your wallet. Hungary has the highest VAT in the European Union at a staggering 27%. Worse, once you add social security contributions, the real tax wage on labor is an oppressive 41.2%, one of the highest in the OECD. You are paying Swedish-level taxes, but receiving crumbling, underfunded public services. Where does this money go? Not to Hungary's collapsing public hospitals. Instead, the previous government is heavily criticized for operating a massive system of political patronage, funneling public funds directly into businesses owned by a tight circle of state-connected elites. Meanwhile, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding for the elderly. A devastating Human Rights Watch report from January 2026 revealed that nearly 500,000 Hungarian pensioners, almost a quarter of the retired population, now live below the official poverty line. Because cumulative, hyper-aggressive food inflation has skyrocketed while pensions stagnate under the 27% VAT, hundreds of thousands must choose between basic groceries, medicine, or heating. The future is even bleaker. Facing a severe demographic collapse, Hungary's young professionals are fleeing, leaving a shrinking workforce to carry the massive, unsustainable financial burden of an aging, decaying nation. In Hungary, the flat tax is a marketing trick. You are squeezed at the checkout to enrich the elite while your grandparents are left to starve in the cold. Number 3. Ireland. Welcome to the biggest illusion in Europe. On paper, thanks to billions pumped in by American tech giants looking for a tax haven, Ireland has one of the highest GDPs per capita on the planet. But if you actually walk the streets of Dublin as a regular worker, you quickly realize you are living in a country of paper wealth and real-world struggle. The Irish state is swimming in corporate tax money, yet middle-class citizens are heavily squeezed. You pay a 23% VAT on goods and a hefty income tax. But what do you get back? Let's look at the housing market, where Ireland is suffering an unprecedented crisis. There are simply no homes. Young professionals earning good salaries are frequently forced to share bedrooms like college students, because renting a decent apartment in central Dublin can easily burn €2,500 a month. And if you get sick, the healthcare illusion shatters. Unlike other nations, Ireland has no NHS-style free healthcare for everyone. While the daily inpatient hospital charge was abolished, going to the emergency room without a GP referral still costs you a painful €100 fee. Even with a massive record-breaking €27.4 billion public health budget in 2026, the system is struggling, leaving sick patients routinely stranded on trolleys in hospital corridors for days. As a final irony, admitting the state pension is too meager to survive, the government launched a new auto-enrollment scheme in 2026. While a solid investment for your distant retirement, it still inflicts a painful, immediate pay cut today. In Ireland, the state is richer than ever, but citizens must fund their own survival. Number 2, Greece. If you open the financial newspapers today, you'll read glowing stories about the so-called Greek economic miracle and how unemployment has finally dropped down to single digits. But they won't tell you the devastating lifelong price ordinary Greek citizens are still forced to pay for this artificial miracle. Today, Greece remains the ultimate story of infinite systemic punishment. For decades, a bloated, corrupt political machine drove the country into bankruptcy. When the bill came due, the state did not ask politicians to pay. It broke the people. Over the years, Greek pensions were brutally slashed over a dozen times. Even though the Supreme Court ruled some of these cuts unconstitutional, the damage is permanent. According to official 2026 reports, nearly 60% of all retirees are forced to survive on less than €1,000 a month, with the average private sector pension stuck at a miserable €780, leaving older citizens in absolute despair. If you are a working citizen today, you are trapped in a fiscal purgatory. You pay European-level taxes, but you aren't buying public services. You are simply paying off the historical debts of the political class that ruined your nation. Decades of brutal IMF-mandated austerity have hollowed out public hospitals, schools, and transportation networks. Whenever a citizen needs help from the state, they don't find a slow bureaucracy. They find a completely empty locked room. The state took half of the citizens' wealth and handed them back poverty. In Greece, taxation is no longer a contribution to society. It is a lifelong penalty for the catastrophic, unforgivable mistakes of the government, forcing generations into permanent financial exile. Before we reveal our number 1 country, if you're finding this valuable, please drop a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next upload. And if you're interested in a video showing how taxes, rent, energy, and groceries eat up your income the fastest, write the word Europe in the comments below. Number 1, Italy. Unfortunately, Italy is the perfect country to close this ranking because it combines 3 devastating features: high taxes, a deeply complicated system, and public services that fail to deliver. In 2025, Italy's tax pressure reached a record 43.1% of GDP, the highest level in 11 years. At the same time, the national debt remains among the heaviest in the Eurozone, meaning ordinary taxpayers carry a massive, endless, and unjust financial burden. Even with minor reforms in 2026, like reducing the second tax bracket, this record pressure persists due to relentless fiscal drag. But the real tragedy is not just how much Italians pay, but how the system operates. Italy is a frustrating, chaotic labyrinth of bureaucratic traps, suffocating under 71,000 active national laws, more than 10 times the legislative bodies of France or Germany. Unsurprisingly, in the latest OECD ranking, Italy sits near the very bottom, with only 48% of citizens satisfied with administrative services. The healthcare system tells the same story. While successive governments continue to boast about universal coverage, Italy spends just 8.4% of GDP on health, well below the OECD average. Consequently, only 44% of Italians are satisfied with quality care. Despite official promises, the system is structurally failing due to a severe shortage of nurses and doctors, leaving patients facing endless wait times and systemic delays. That is why Italy is number 1 on this list. It is not because it is a poor country, but because it is the ultimate example of a state that takes a premium price from its people, only to hand them back second-rate, dysfunctional services. The ultimate lesson is clear. When bureaucracy grows too massive, taxation stops being a civic contribution and becomes a penalty for state failure. We have seen a recurring tragedy: governments masking systemic decay with paper wealth while shifting the crushing burden of historical debts and demographic collapses directly onto your paycheck. If you are interested in a future video about where paychecks disappear the fastest, remember to comment Europe to show your support. But this fiscal madness does not end here. On the right, you can find the video where we rank 31 European countries by their tax burden. We recommend watching it to get a full overview of the situation. That's all for this video. See you next time.